Hi, this is Marta from Ruby Soup with Pro Juice, and today I want to give a recap of a book festival here in Stockholm that I attended on the 11th of November 2017. It is a book festival that has only been held twice so far. It had its debut in 2016. It is hosted at the Finnish institution at Snickarbacken 15. And this book festival, I'll say the name in Swedish and in Finnish, and then I'll do a rough translation for it in English because it doesn't have a name yet in English. It is called Sverigefinska Bok-och Kultur mässan, ruotsinsuomalainen kirjamessut. And roughly that would be translated as the Sweden-Finn Book and Culture Festival. And the idea for this book festival is that it highlights people of Finnish descent who write here in Sweden. And it also focuses quite a bit on people that write in Finnish and publish in Finnish here in Sweden, regardless if they're first or second generation Sweden Finns. And the reason for this festival is that I might have mentioned this on my channel before, but in case you're new, Sweden Finns are Finnish-speaking Swedes that are a recognized minority here in Sweden. So this book festival is basically trying to highlight a minority in Sweden by highlighting their literature. But enough about that. Let's talk a little bit about what happened there when I went there. The first writer that I saw talk at the festival was Asko Sahlberg. He has become a very famous author in Finland and in Sweden, but he actually has also been translated into English and was nominated for the International Dublin Literary Award. This book called Pimers, which would be translated as Darkness by Asko Sahlberg signed. This volume has his Darkness trilogy, the 3 books that consist of this trilogy in one edition. And Asko Sahlberg is kind of a little bit more known for writing very, very kind of somber, very kind of borderline cynical stories. And he said that one of the reasons why his books tend to be a little bit more dark and cynical is because it kind of reflects his own views on the world. He said that the world is in fact very chaotic and sometimes quite dark. But then, nevertheless, he feels that tragedy is actually a lot more nuanced than what people give it credit for, that there is actually a lot of humor in tragedy itself. And in fact, a lot of people would say this, that comedy needs tragedy and tragedy kind of needs comedy. When he was being interviewed at the Sweden Film Festival, he talked about how he is very happy about being a world citizen, that he identifies as Finnish, but also as a Sweden Finn, and how having a distance to both the country that he lives in and the country that he was born in, which was Finland, and Sweden is the one that he lives in, that because he is kind of distant from both of these countries, that he has a certain distance that he can see things more objectively and write more honestly. And he has also said that in his writing he wanted to kind of reflect that in Sweden, one of the stigmatas that the Sweden Finns go through is that they are kind of categorized as violent and as quite hostile. And his writing has often tried to give a more nuanced image of Sweden Finns because he believes that, and this is true of course, like that Finnish speakers in Sweden, they are not any more violent than any other group. And he talks a lot about what it was like for Finnish immigrants that came to Sweden during the 60s and about the loneliness that they felt and the work that they did. Back then they worked a lot in factories, which today is not so much a truth anymore, but it was back then. He has kind of thought about quitting writing several times, but he always feels that these themes of being an outsider and things like the war children from Finland and such haven't really been discussed enough in literature, so he always picks up the pen and starts writing again. His newest book, which is called Amandan Maailmat, which means Amanda's Worlds, is noted to be a little bit more softened, a little bit more heartwarming than his other books. And Asko Sahlberg said that this was done on purpose. And he actually said that he wanted to make a more optimistic book this time because he is kind of known for his cynicism. He explained that he writes in Finnish despite living in Sweden is because it's his way of keeping the Finnish language alive for himself, because otherwise in his life he does speak Swedish and he doesn't really interact with that many Finnish communities. He writes in Finnish as a way to make sure that he won't forget this language. The next author I saw talk was Kirsi Blomberg, and she was there promoting her newest novel, which was Lääkittäin hyvä tahto, which means medically achieved goodwill. And this is a more science fiction-y, futuristic novel compared to her other novels, which have been contemporaries. And she said that when she started writing this book, she didn't want to write a utopia or a dystopia, because she believes that the world is a little bit more complicated than that. We don't live in utopias, we don't live in dystopias. We live in worlds that have their flaws and their virtues, and things are always a little bit more complicated than what we would like them to be, and that there are a lot of gray areas in life. And she wanted to kind of write a science fiction book that reflected on this. She has also said that when she writes, then she tries to always write fiction that people can picture in their minds. She tries to write very visual, very cinematic kind of novels, and that is her writing style. This is a signed copy of Kirsi Blomberg's Turpa kiinni Tukholmassa, and the signature says, "To Lena, don't worry about being quiet." And the reason why she signed it was that this book is actually called Keeping Your Mouth Shut in Stockholm, and it's about a woman who decides that she's going to be quiet for an entire year. And this book, Kirsi Blomberg has written a little bit as a protest against the Sweden-Finn literature that has been before, because a lot of the Sweden-Finn literature has kind of, I mean, in a way it has reflected something that was true for a time, because the Finnish immigrants that came in the 60s, they often did do low-paying jobs, and they often were a little bit more poor. But nowadays, Finnish speakers, most of them are middle class and even upper middle class here in Sweden. And this book is about a Finnish-speaking woman who is actually even rich. So Kirsi Blomberg has said, and it even says here in the back cover, that she did not want to write about a poor Finn who is an alcoholic and who is suffering from domestic violence, because she felt that those stories have already been told, and it's time that Finnish speakers start to kind of describe a little bit of a different kind of background, like different kind of stories. And that's why this book was kind of such a big deal, because it resonated with a lot of Finnish speakers, because as I said, most of us nowadays, we come from middle class, and you know, we don't necessarily even like have any experiences with addiction or domestic violence or something like that. I think you could say like there's a danger in only telling one kind of story, and this book was kind of telling a little bit of a different one. I will mention as a final thing that when the interview was over, Kirsi Blomberg said that she was very thankful for the people that organized the festival and took time out of their free time to work there and organize it, and that if it wasn't for people that were volunteering at this festival, then it probably would not be held at all. And the last author that I saw there was Leo Ylitalo. And he just won in 2016 Kaiso Vilhunen award, which is like the biggest award that you can give to fiction published in Finnish in Sweden. But he was not there to talk about the book that had won this award, which was Suraristi. He was there to talk about his second novel, which is called Banaanitalo, which means the banana house. He explained that he came about writing this novel in that he had a nightmare where he dreamed about a co-worker that committed suicide. And he woke up from his dream and he was all disoriented and disturbed, and he decided that he was going to write this dream down and hoped that would help him sleep a little bit better. And this came about from an actual suicide that he had witnessed in his youth. And he sat down and he wrote the suicide scene. But then he realized that there was actually more to the story than that. So he then ended up writing an entire novel about his experiences working at a Marabou chocolate factory in the 70s in Sweden. He mentioned that in his novel, which are based very heavily on his own experiences, he wanted to talk about what it was like when all these young people from Finland came to work in Sweden, and they tried to have a comradeship among themselves when they were working in these factories together. Despite not always great pay and the not so kind society always, him and the other young men there at the factory tried to have a small community. He also mentioned that there are characters in these books, like there are two Muslim characters, one who is a Shia and one who is a Sunni, who are constantly in conflict with each other, which was also based on something that he had witnessed at his workplace. And he kind of wanted to talk about how we have a very simplistic views on other cultures, and that we kind of think that all people from X group are the same, when in fact it's always a little bit more complicated than that. And he also wrote a Chilean woman in this book who is also a lesbian. And he said that the reason why he had such a diverse cast, despite also writing from a Finnish point of view, was because he kind of wanted to say that despite the problems that the Finnish speakers had in Sweden, and actually even these other immigrants had in Sweden, and the fact that they were all there in the factory and working together also showed a certain kind of willingness to be open and multicultural in Sweden. And that despite being a very much a depiction of working conditions and immigrant experience, it also tackles things that are universal, like whether or not to start a family and whether or not to have children and such. And that he has written this book purposefully to mimic that attentive dialogue. So that was it for today. I hope you liked this video. If you did, click the like button, subscribe. Have you been to this festival, or do you know anything about these writers? Comment down below. Or is there any other obscure book festivals from where you're from that you would like to talk about? I would love to hear about it. Comment down below. Let's share the news about obscure book festivals, and I'll talk to you in my next video. Bye!